Welcome to The Agent's Angle, the premier podcast on the football agent business. I am Peter Paleologos.
And I'm Jonathan Booker.
In this episode of The Agent's Angle, we interview an exam candidate from the Americas. We also look at the current state of play of the FIFA Football Agent Regulations worldwide and the need also for national associations and FIFA to cater for agents with special needs.
So in a week that has even more people confused about the state of the football agents industry, listen in to this episode of The Agent's Angle. What a week. Indeed, what a week, Peter. I think a lot of people in the football agent world are somewhat lost, not so much as what to say after this week on agent matters, but more so which bit to believe concerning FFAR and agent regulations.
This week's been a perplexing week, I would say. The goalposts have shifted the way the regulations are going to be applied around the world, and that is concerning because agents want certainty, and this is what this new FFAR, FIFA Football Agent Regulations, is all about. But we know in certain countries, things are a little bit uncertain or delayed, so it's a very confusing time when we all should be at a point where we know where we stand.
Yeah. We've had several conversations this week about the planning for the show, and everything changes week by week. But one conversation we had earlier this week in planning this episode, and it was fair to say there's a difference of opinion. Now, as people have probably recognised, you're a more cautious and politically attuned person on the podcast. And you didn't want the podcast to become perceived as anti-establishment and not least anti-FIFA. Whereas I more so want to say that it is and talk bluntly and frankly on such matters. And if I followed the advice of my mom and my nan, they often said, if you don't have anything nice to say, then don't say it at all. But if I followed that approach, this would be a very, very short podcast. And I wouldn't have had much to say on the topic of agent regulations for the past 10 years, if not more. But my mum was also someone who took her responsibilities very seriously, and in particular, those responsibilities she had to others. So I'm not going to change my approach for the foreseeable future. And if certain people don't like it, don't give me a reason to complain or be so blunt. Walk the walk rather than talk the talk, and be open and transparent. And hopefully from the article I wrote in the last week and some of what I have to say in this episode, whilst holding people accountable, I will also give praise and credit where it is due. So for those in the football authorities, you might want to set whatever recording device you've got to record, because from me, some of you might actually get some praise this week. It doesn't happen often on agent-related matters.
However, we're here to be balanced, to look at the facts and look at the current position of the agent's world or angle, or whatever we want to call it. Last week, we spoke to 3 different agents around the world that took the exam, the September 20th exam, from Indonesia, from Nigeria, and also from England. This week, we're shifting to the Americas. I want to introduce to our listeners and to the show Cody Lorendi, who's an ex-professional footballer, I believe a goalkeeper. Cody played for Puerto Rico as an international, 1 game, maybe more, but I can be corrected on that. Welcome, Cody, to the Agent's Angle.
Peter, Jonathan, thank you for having me on. Let the record state I think I played about 11 matches for the national team of Puerto Rico.
That's fantastic. I don't think we've had that many ex-international players who are agents or in the industry. I want to begin by I had a look at some reports, including one from the actual USSF, or the United States Soccer Federation, and that over 300 candidates sat the FIFA football exam. How was the exam conducted by the United States Soccer Federation? How did you find the exam processing?
Well, to be fair, I think USSF did quite a good job. There were, if 300 is the word, that sounds about right. They hosted it at the Hilton in Chicago. Registration took, I don't know, I think I was standing in line for less than 10 minutes. Wi-Fi was provided, and I know my colleagues over in the UK, Wi-Fi is a touchy subject at the moment. But I feel like it was a very well-run examination. What I did notice, sitting amongst my colleagues here in North America, that confidence in the exam itself was, I'd say, quite low.
So in terms of yourself, did you find the exam challenging, or what were the most challenging aspects?
Yeah, I find it quite challenging, to be completely honest with you. I'm not a great test taker to begin with. and things like, bridge transfers or FIFA football tribunal questions. Those things, they gave me a hard time. I found it challenging. Now, from an ethics standpoint, you know what is right from wrong, but the hypotheticals, they were a big challenge.
One thing for me, Cody, that I want to ask, I'm quite into American sports,
Yes.
and I recognize that the agents industry in American sports is very advanced, and it's been held out as an example as a plus and a minus with these new regulations. So my question is there much evidence of established American agents in other sports now looking at this FIFA exam and coming into soccer or football in the US as the market grows?
Yeah, I think that's a very, very good question. Based off of just my anecdotal experience at the exam, I did see a lot of, I'd say, quote unquote, well-known American soccer agents. So you had the guys from Wasserman, you had the guys from CAA. I believe YMU had a representative there. 21 Sports, I think they're an Argentinian-based, representation company. A friend of mine who works for them sat next to me to take the exam. I don't know of other, we'll say, individuals who are involved in American football or baseball that are kind of turning towards football, if you will, as an avenue to kind of branch out to. But I think it's very possible. I think the excitement and the sport itself here in the US is on this, and I don't say this to be dramatic, it's on a absolute rocket ship right now in terms of its overall excitement, overall just interest, if you will. So it would not surprise me, but I didn't notice anybody outside the footballing bubble, if you will.
You mentioned confidence was a bit low amongst the candidates. How was your interactions with the other candidates after the exam or before the exam? And how did most of the people you interacted with, the prospective agents, feel about the exam and the whole process?
Yeah, I think you could kind of surmise it to when you're a kid in class and you have a big presentation and you don't want to present in front of everybody, but once you do, you're kind of relieved. I took it as a good networking opportunity as well. So I was going around and meeting individuals who I was able to put a face to a name. And in this industry, it doesn't matter where in the world you are, it's almost as if there's 1 or 2 degrees of separation, right? So on top of coming there for work, it was wonderful to meet people that I only know via WhatsApp, if you will, or social media.
Yeah, that's one thing that, I know from my experience being based in Australia, I went to Europe quite a bit to meet agents at seminars like Y Scout Forum, etc. And that's where you can meet a lot of people at the one time. And I think what you just mentioned is important because you've got a lot of US-based agents in the one space, and it was sort of a networking opportunity. So that's important.
Right.
Yeah, it sounds like the exam for yourself and the other candidates in the US went okay with regards to connectivity and platform issues with the actual exam platform. But I will ask the question that is a bit hypothetical. From those you spoke to after the exam and those who specifically might not have been that confident, you said confidence was at a low. We're having reports now of resits in one territory in particular and possibly elsewhere as things develop over time. And when this podcast goes out, it will probably have changed again. How do you think it will be received by the candidates there actually having sat with them if candidates elsewhere who failed the exam get the opportunity of a resit based solely on the fact that there were connectivity and technical issues?
Yeah, I could see that not being received well. However, to play devil's advocate, I still firmly believe having the check mark next to your name saying FIFA licensed agent. Listen, you still have to go out and you still have to work. You have to build trust. You have to find clients to work for. You have to put in years and years of work for sometimes very little reward, if any. Without being dramatic, it's a labor of love here. You want to see people succeed.
I think that's a really valuable message for anybody who either has passed this exam or failed this exam to remember that and really use it to motivate forward.
That's a very good point. We've seen recently Messi join the MLS, and that's just, as you said, taking the sport to a stratosphere.
Right.
But your aspirations, Cody, what's your aspirations as an agent in the future?
Now, in the US, most agents will either work specifically on the men's side or the women's side. I do both. And I do both because I feel like I have enough, I'd say, time. I'm able to allocate evenly, if you will, to my clients. I don't feel overwhelmed. But because I'm independent, if I really want to scale my business, that is where I think either joining up with a bigger agency or an agency that just has more in the way of resources would be beneficial, or finding another independent agent that, we have the same end goal. We've spent time together, we've built rapport, and we take it as far as we possibly can go. What I really enjoy out of this is seeing people succeed. My client's success is my success. I love seeing people achieve things. And if I feel like I'm able to play a small role in that and then make money at the end of the day doing it, I feel very complete.
Well, Cody, we wish you good luck with your career path. I really appreciate you coming on the podcast.
Thank you, guys.
And for all our listeners, we wanted to cover all 5 or 6 confederations. We did make efforts to get someone from South America to speak on their exam experience, but unfortunately, both could not make themselves available in time. So we didn't forget about the candidates there. However, from the interviews we've done with the candidates, I think one consistent thing we've heard is that the exam was quite tough or very tough for them. Maybe not all. However, the questions were very random and not all focused on the FFAR or FIFA RSTP. Also, all the candidates approached the exam the right way and want to approach the industry in a professional manner.
And something we intended to cover last week was another article, again, in relation to the agent's exam. And this was an article by Richard Amofa in The Athletic from Wednesday, the 20th of September, the same date as the second exam. And it is something quite close to my heart for a number of reasons. And I don't want it to be forgotten about with all the other confusion that is going on. But for 2 organisations, FIFA and the FA, who preach and pontificate on matters such as inclusivity, equality and accessibility, this article is hugely disappointing to read. Now, how you interpret this article on the basis of whether you see it as seemingly one wholesale problem of ignorance within elements of 2 of football's authorities, or whether you view it as 2 related issues. That FIFA get criticised for one and the FA get criticised for another. So I'm going to address them separately. The first is directed at FIFA primarily and is only briefly touched upon in the article in The Athletic, but it's still important. Now, rather than being in relation to the exam, it is in relation to the study materials for the exam. But as the exam is open book, the exam materials and the study materials are relevant. We know there were over 500 pages of study materials for the first FIFA exam, and for this second one, there was just under 700 pages of study materials. And I don't think I'm wide of the mark in saying it has been a bundle of somewhat disparate documents from FIFA of varying quality and format, all grouped as one PDF. But credit where it's due, it is a small but welcome step forward when compared to pre-2015, when I'm sure you might remember as well, Peter, the agent exam candidates back then were often given a list of documents you had to go and find from FIFA or your national association and then hope you had the latest version. But with regards to the study material, important point is made in this article for candidates who may have a variety of learning difficulties such as dyslexia or dyspraxia, or even some form of disability such as a visual impairment. Now, for candidates, the study materials are large blocks of text that would be difficult for such candidates to study, or indeed refer to in an open book exam. From a studying perspective, there's no video, audio, or multimedia resources available. And FIFA's excuse, and I will use the term excuse rather than reason, is along the lines of, due to the rapidly changing nature of the regulations, means that by the time any new audio or video versions are released, there would be a high probability of it being out of date. Sorry, FIFA, that doesn't wash, as with a lot of excuses we hear. FIFA has spent over 5 years with FFAR. I suspect they pretty much knew the final regulations 6 months or so before they announced them officially. And correct me if I'm wrong, Peter, but FIFA regulation changes usually have to be approved by council or some appointed committee for approval before those changes can be made. Also, there are adequate gaps in the FFAR timeline from FIFA to make study materials available in more helpful formats if FIFA wanted to do so. So on that, I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Peter.
Look, I do. I recall when we did the exam pre-2015 period, yes, there was also national regulations we had to look at. For example, in Australia, even a collective bargaining agreement in terms of the league and the players. So there was a little bit different, and you had to source documents and make sure, as you mentioned, have the updated documents. I think that FIFA have been good with its football legal forums, its updated circulars, its presentation to candidates. We had an online presentation to candidates early in the year about the exam, how it would work, and the procedure, and also provided other information. What for me is concerning, and having assisted a lot of agents with study of the exam, there was a lot of weight on the agent regulations, the FFAR, and the RSTP. Yet many exam questions were not related to those two major regulatory pieces. Nothing was weighted. In fact, a lot of questions were coming from more obscure FIFA documents. So that was the major concern that I saw.
And another thing to highlight, there's actually been reports of people getting the same question duplicated in the same exam. I'm not sure how accurate those reports are, but that's been reported in the media as well. Now, onto the FA and the point of which they are criticised in the same article, which are taped to be the main crux of this article in The Athletic. And the first line of the article is, the English FA have been criticised for making a disabled candidate feel they weren't being taken seriously before taking the new agents exam. And without making light of this particular case or being insensitive, there are a lot of people in the agent fraternity who have felt for quite some time, years in some cases, that elements, not saying all, of the FA don't take them seriously. But in this case, this is deeply worrying and saddening, as the candidate in question has mutant neuron output difficulties and has problem with their sight, which makes looking at screens difficult. Amongst other things, that meant they are justified in seeking allowances in circumstances such as a computer-based exam. The details of this case and the agent candidate in question are, in my view, made worse based on the following facts. 1, they missed the first exam in April after their request to the FA's intermediary line went unanswered. Again, something I've heard from many agents and intermediaries over the years. And if we go back to the last episode, our candidate guest from England actually mentioned that as well. 2, they were asked to provide proof of their disability, which they did, but under UK law, they didn't necessarily have to. 3, they requested an ergonomic chair to assist them in sitting the exam, being told the venue, which is a very large venue, would be unable to provide it. That wouldn't be so bad, but they were asked to bring their own chair from home, which when they live in London, approximately 110 miles away from the venue, it's not very helpful.
Wow.
Indeed, it's not very helpful for what many would perceive a pretty basic request under the circumstances. 4, they were told they could walk and stretch during the exam under supervision, although confined to a small area. Note, under supervision. Controlled exam environment, yes, we've got no problem with that. But from what we've heard, the exam environment in Birmingham was far from a controlled exam environment. It descended, according to some people, into absolute chaos, with people allowed to use phones, take photos, make calls, and the room was not described as small or confined. And finally, the candidate had to contact the FA again on September the 4th, just 2 weeks before the second exam, and only then were reasonable adjustments made for them to sit the exam. Now, a bit of praise here. Thankfully, in the end, someone at the FA got hold of this, and there are some very good people at the FA in England. And there is I've noticed a steady but slow change in attitude, which from personal experience, I believe is reflected in the FA's current CEO, Mark Bullingham. This FA official recognised the importance of the situation and applied the duty of care that was required from the start, and adequate allowances were made. But should it have taken so long? And no surprise, the candidate in question, in their own words, felt, 1, and I quote, I wasn't being taken seriously. And 2, they admit it stressed them out and made them feel very anxious, not ideal for such an important exam. It's all very disturbing, saddening, and disappointing, and also infuriating at times. And this is just one such case. How many other cases are there that may well be viewed as disgraceful and a desertion of responsibility, if not any duty of care they may hold?
This is very concerning in terms of what's happened there. Thankfully, it was sorted out. But there are, as we know, in all our communities, people with special needs, and there are agents with special needs, and they need to be catered for. I know in Australia, an examinee in the September 2023 exam contacted me, and they wanted to know how they would approach the Football Association, Football Australia as we know it here, that they had a special need and needed certain requirements met before they can sit the exam. I actually gave them advice to how to engage with Football Australia, the requisite department who was dealing with the exam, quickly and efficiently, and thankfully their circumstances were catered for in this instance. So, and as we've seen with some of our interviews, a lot of exams did go well. They were organised, and there was even some social event after. So it's a case-by-case basis. You're going to have certain situations, and it's disappointing to hear what happened in England on several levels. However, there are other federations or national associations who did a very, very good job in ensuring it was efficient, fair, and needs of certain candidates were met, Jonathan.
Yeah, we heard that firsthand from the candidate guests we've had on both this week and last week. And it's great to hear that so many countries undertook the exam pretty well from what we've heard, and also the feedback we've had separately to those interviews. But I think the problem that we have and candidates have with it are the inconsistencies. And that's what's angering and frustrating quite a lot of people. And when we think things couldn't get any more confusing and inconsistent, they do, just this last week. And there is fallout from the Birmingham exam.
There is. We heard about what happened with the Wi-Fi and the chaos by one of our candidate guests from England. It's been reported on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, the news media, the newspapers. And now there has been an outcome for those who were affected and didn't pass the exam and were affected by the Wi-Fi and all the other chaotic circumstances that were described anecdotally to us or in some of that media article. Now, I know there's been in England through the FA and FIFA agent exam reset. What we know is, and this has happened just in the last few days, that candidates who did sit the FIFA agent exam at the NEC Stadium, I think it is, Jonathan, in Birmingham.
National Exhibition Centre in Birmingham, huge venue.
And those who didn't pass, and I will say this, it was 52% passed in April overall around the world, and we've gone through figures in different countries in previous episodes. However, I've heard feedback from around the world that this time around, a lot of candidates may have not passed worldwide. I don't know the figures, but that's anecdotally what's been coming in. But going back to England, that all the candidates who didn't pass can now sit the exam as of, it actually started, I believe, today, can sit it remotely. They had to register for an exam slot. It was a very short period of time. That registration period is ended, and there were exam slots for 100 candidates at any one time between the period of 29 September and the 2nd of October, which is a couple of days after the supposed start of the FIFA Agent Regulations. They could sit these resit exams at home, and a company was brought in, a specialist company by the name of Vic TVS, to provide the remote invigilation. So an invigilator is the examining official that would have been at the exam venue. Now they have a remote system where they can monitor that you've got 1 hour, it's open book, make sure that there's certain rules that are followed. So it's a remote invigilation. There'll be computers applications obviously be monitored. They'll be looking at the way the examinee is on the computer. So they've obviously got the technology, but that's what's happened right now. Only in England, though, because of the internet issues. And we've heard that other countries may have had internet issues, but it's only England and the FA have provided a reset.
This is very likely to change even as we speak, as has been the case in the last couple of weeks for us. Now, this leaves me justifiably, and quite a lot of other people justifiably, asking questions over fairness and consistency for examinees elsewhere, such as, should they have a resit as well? And in addition to that, as well as those who failed the first exam, if they had technical issues. But I won't go into that now, as I mentioned aspects of that in the article I wrote earlier in the week that I spoke about. Now, brace yourself, Peter, and everybody listening. I'm going to have to take a lie down in a darkened room after this. I'm going to give credit where credit is due again to the FA in England for having the kahunas to try and address this problem as best they can in a very short space of time. Whether it's the right decision, I don't know. But as I said in the last episode, I don't think there is any decision that would truly have satisfied everyone here. Bravo to the FA for taking a decision on the resit. I think it's gutsy. Have they made it on their own? We don't know. Have FIFA been involved? We don't know. Bravo again to them for appointing an independent provider specialised in the aspect of exam vigilation, monitoring the situation and the exam environment. But my biggest questions now are, should the likes of the FA and other associations being put in this predicament by FIFA? FIFA could have taken the initiative the FA have done in the space of a few days, not a few years, in assigning exam invigilation to an independent provider, or even various universities and colleges who are geared up to manage processes like this. The next question is there now a stigma hanging over anyone licensed in England, not just this exam, as the Birmingham exam is now widely recognised as a source of many who shouldn't have passed it, but did? Pre-2015, I'll admit this, agents licensed in certain countries had a certain stigma attached because of how agent licenses were believed to be obtained in certain jurisdictions. You'd meet them, and when finding out where they were registered, I would openly admit, develop, if not an unfair bias about them as agents. Yes, we could say the FA in England are closing the stable door after the horse has bolted with this decision with the reset. But in the FA's defence and other national associations, they've acted and arguably didn't leave open the stable door in the first place. And probably the biggest thing for me in all of this is that I now firmly believe the integrity of the licence and the regulations, as well as the value of holding the licence, is hugely degraded for everyone in one way or another, whether you're a legacy agent, whether you're a newly qualified agent, whether you're an intermediary over many years and now qualified as a licensed agent. What was FIFA's claim with FFAR to begin with? And I quote, "New rules will guarantee minimum professional and ethical standards for the occupation of football agent." I'm just bewildered where we stand at the moment.
And look, I agree with you. The FA moved very quickly. They took responsibility because of the venue issue. And I agree that it was very gutsy to allow a reset and to bring so quickly an independent provider to remotely organise and make sure the exam was transparent. The one being set, I think, 29th, which is pretty much today, tomorrow, and the next day into October.
Just to show how quick that was possibly Tuesday, maybe Wednesday, when more details were starting to be released about the exam.
Yeah.
And we just thought things were going to get clearer and some order in place. And then we had something else that threw us. So can you highlight that?
Yes, I will. And this relates to the arbitration, the Rule K arbitration proceedings that's been pursued or filed by 4 big agencies, Stella, Base, Arati. And basically, the tribunal or the arbitration tribunal has come forward and said that we're not going to make a decision until about the 30th of November, maybe earlier. So we know that on the 1st of October, the FIFA Football Agent Regulations are supposed to start worldwide. We know that they don't apply in Germany because there is an injunction there, but pretty much all other countries, including England, are meant to start subject to any injunction or any court case. Now, in this case, in England, they've been suspended for that period until at least the 30th of November, maybe earlier, until a decision is made. So they've been postponed. So what happens now? Those arbitration proceedings, what does that mean? Basically, that in England's case, the FIFA Football Agent Regulations or National Football Agent Regulations that the FA is seeking to implement are not going ahead. In terms of operating in England, you're going back to the intermediary regulations. So basically, those regulations that are currently in place will still apply. We're talking about transactions, we're talking about intermediary activity, that everyone who's an intermediary can still properly operate until, and if they haven't passed the exam, can still operate until a decision is made. So it's going to come now down to this arbitration, what decision is made, because if the decision is that certain FIFA rules in terms of the FFAR are not acceptable in England, then it's back to the drawing board for the FA as well as FIFA, because it would be a situation where you're pretty much like Germany, where the regulations don't apply. Now, we know that Germany, France, and Italy have got unique features in that regard, how the FIFA Football Agent Regulations apply. And I'm wondering whether this Rule K arbitration might put England in the same position.
It's a really confusing one, and you're probably in a better position to understand this than most of those in the agent profession, given your legal background. But arbitration in itself is difficult for many to get their heads around at first. And we've got someone who's an expert in the field of Rule K arbitration to come on to explain further in a not too distant episode, as not only in this case, but overall, it's vital for agents new and old operating in England or with English clients to know and understand. But going back to this news, when it broke this week, I was utterly baffled by what happens next. And I don't think I'm alone in that, as it posed so many questions for me in terms of agents in England and outside of England, including on a very basic and macro level. The first one stems around who is licensed as of tomorrow. And I'm talking tomorrow being the 1st of October. This podcast will go out the day before. So the first thing is, and these are hypothetical situations, if you haven't passed the FFAR exam, but were a registered FA intermediary before the 1st of October, can you operate in England and arguably Germany, but nowhere else? Second one, if you passed the exam in England, but weren't an intermediary before the 1st of October, can you act everywhere else but England, at least as new candidate knowledge was tested on FFAR, not RWWI? And finally, if you're an agent under FFAR from elsewhere, can you operate in England if you're not an intermediary? These questions all have to be answered in a couple of days' time, if not hours, depending on when you're listening to this. Now, if the FA are retaining regulations on working with intermediaries, the RWWI, which RWWI are they using? Because in terms of FIFA, their RWWI no longer exists from the 1st of October and they don't recognise intermediaries. And I would argue, now this is one for the lawyers, even if they were retained by the FA, are they still underpinned by FIFA's regulations on working with intermediaries? I suggest they are in some ways, such as the test of good character and the agreement all FA registered intermediaries sign up to annually on renewal with the English FA, which in my view, you might differ in opinion. Technically, it's a contract, Peter. It's understanding between the two parties. What happens to the rep agreements between agents and clients that were written to comply with FFAR after the 1st of October, and contracts now to be signed whilst everything is sorted out? It leaves us in total limbo on contracts. How do you write these contracts? How do you compose them with so much uncertainty that could change? As you said, we know it's got a deadline in November for a decision, but it could well be before that. To top it all off, we were due to look at the FA's proposals for National Football Agent Regulations in this episode, by the way. Where does this leave the FA's National Football Agent Regulations, the NFAR? We both looked at it, and I think we both agree there are some good things in there, but are those now shelved for the foreseeable future? The bright note, however, is that there's going to be a lot of very happy lawyers off the back of this who are going to be very busy, I think.
Jonathan, being a lawyer myself, I would agree with that. A lot of lawyers are giving opinions on what this means. Is it a transition period where now the FA, they must have liaised with FIFA, I would say, about how to deal with this exam issue, but also how to deal with the Rule K delay arbitration. We know that the FFAR allow national associations. Some are recognised. National laws are respected in France and Italy by FIFA in terms of agency, but also that FIFA can recognise other systems. Now, this is a unique one because this system in England, at least for the next month or two, is the regulations of working with intermediary system and not the current FIFA system that's coming on board. So it's a very interesting space. But I also agree with you, and we're going to assess this in the future, that we've got to look at, firstly, how the Rule K may come out, the outcome, but also how it works. And secondly, what impact that will have on England, on its National Football Agent Regulations going forward, or if the arbitration is a win for the agents, the four big agencies, maybe have to look at another system. So it's a unique time, especially for England, but I agree. If I'm there as an agent and I don't know what's going to happen post-November, how do I do my contract? Do I try to do a hybrid where I say, I'll try to comply with the 2 years I'm allowed to have a player under FIFA Football Agent Regulations. However, I've got a contract that mandates with players that I need to deal with now, and I want to get on with commercial and the business. It is a very confusing time. And as you mentioned, a lot of people have to get legal advice or get clauses in their rep agreements, representative agreements, to ensure that should it change one way or the other, these agreements that have been executed are still valid and not going to be voided. So A lot of key agents may be going to lawyers to see how they can protect themselves, because as we know, it's a very competitive business and you need to ensure that your paperwork, and this is what it's also, FIFA Football Agent Regulations are also about compliance and paperwork, as is the English system. All agents need to have their paperwork in order because we all need to put it into the FIFA system, which is an international deal, but also going forward the English system. A lot of them will be scampering around looking for legal advice to ensure your agreements going forward basically meet whatever the outcome's going to be.
Peter, I don't mean to put you on the spot here, but are we looking at a situation here for agents and intermediaries to really consider, put the regulations almost to one side and ensure that they've got a legally binding contract there between themselves and their clients? Is that the best way for them to ensure that they are properly protected?
Look, I can't give obviously legal advice on the podcast, and we never do that. But I will say this, it's about your legal protections. As we know, there's no template FIFA contract at the moment. I know one's going to be probably drafted and put together as a template, but there's not one available at the moment. So all you can look at is FIFA Football Agent Regulations. What are the requirements of a contract? The 5 major points. You look at what the law in England is. We've got to remember we've got common law, we've got labour laws as well. And I know the FA has got certain types of contracts as well that are minimums. But really, you would need to get English lawyer advice on this, but an English lawyer with a bit of an international focus and who understands the implications with the FIFA. Because we've got to remember, we're an international business. So that contract is not just for England. It also has got to have an outward focus in transferring players or assisting in the transfer of players outside of England. So it's very complicated. And you mentioned it earlier, it's the lawyers who probably win, at least in the next couple of months until this is sorted out.
Another point I want to make here, Peter, and another area of uncertainty as of the 1st of October, and this only came out from me sitting down and having a coffee with another agent who I've known as long as I've been in the business. And this is a point that FIFA officials keep stressing in order to, I believe, unjustifiably erode some of the agents' concerns and objections to FFAR. And this is the need to protect minors with the agent regulations. An important point, I think we'll all agree, but in essence, I think it is a virtue signalling shield to an extent from some at FIFA. So here is my question. Viewing this as of the last day in September and looking forward to tomorrow, the 1st of October, when the FFAR in certain regions, as we discussed, will be implemented in full. As of midnight tonight, can any agent under FFAR represent a minor on a matter that has an international dimension? I would argue no, unless they have a representation agreement that is in place pre-December 2022, when FIFA ratified the FFAR. The reason being, and the reason why I argue this, is that you have to complete FFAR CPD modules for representing minors. And that is yet to be released on the agent platform, as far as I understand it. Even those who passed the exam in April or registered on legacy or national pathways for FFAR haven't had access to the CPD modules yet. This is just one further facet of this total meteoric shambles from FIFA with the FIFA Football Agent Regulations that has been conveniently avoided, in my opinion.
That's a very interesting question, because the prerequisite is with minors, and we know that you have to do the CPD points in order to basically get that accreditation to be working with minors in terms of the international dimension. Obviously, domestically in England, we know, and in Australia and many other countries, you have checks for agents or people working with minors. They must get those checks and certificates before they can work with or work with a guardian of minors, etc. But that is a good point, because under the FFAR, you have had to do the course, the continued professional education course, the CPD, to represent minors. That's interesting because that's a prerequisite. None of us were legacy agents or exam agents have had a chance to do that module. That's quite concerning. But I will say this, that the FFAR starts on the 1st of October. And we know there are 4,500 agents already in the system. There actually was a FIFA release today on the implementation of the FIFA Football Agent Regulations. What it's basically said, it's going ahead in pretty much all countries with the exception of Germany, and we discussed England before. Germany because of a preliminary injunction, They also mentioned there's some ongoing court cases. Some have been resolved, some haven't. We know that in Belgium, the TFF, the Football Forums case by the Brussels Enterprise Court, there wasn't no injunction given then. I've heard in the Czech Republic the same. Spain, no injunction at the moment, although there is a court case. And we know that the Holland, or Netherlands, I should say, that court case that was, I believe, sponsored by the European Football Agent Association, also there was no injunction. That doesn't mean the case is not still alive, because you need to have a decision on the merits. But in terms of interim injunctions, only Germany at the moment is the one that had an interim injunction. And we've had this in the podcast about 3 weeks ago. We had Joachim Rain talk about the situation in Germany. We also have Switzerland, no injunction there. However, I believe that there might be some sort of investigation to the competitional aspects of the football agent regulations of FIFA. Not sure about that, but that's some of the anecdotal information I have received. However, for most of us, the 4,500 plus agents, 1st of October is nearly here, and we begin under the FFAR. Most national associations have started drafting or have released their national football agents regulations. So that's where we stand. But ultimately, I think the biggest decision, and we had obviously the Court of Arbitration of Sport decision, Pro-FIFA v FIFA, but I think the biggest decision here is the European Court of Justice, where a lot of the cases from Europe, maybe we'll exclude Switzerland, but that decision, the European Court of Justice decision, is the one that is probably a year away, maybe less, maybe more. That's the one that every football club, agent, FIFA, UEFA, national association, especially in Europe, but worldwide as well, are looking at. That's the decision that ultimately may decide the fate of the FIFA Football Agents Regulations.
Not just the fate of the FIFA Football Agent Regulations, but also the fate of a lot of agents, I would say, a lot of individuals and businesses, and also the knock-on effects for their clients and their families. And in light of that, I'd be tempted to say this, Peter, and I've said this to a couple of people this week with all that has gone on. And there must be some people at FIFA who must be thinking, and I apologise for using this rather unsavoury term in advance, that if the FFAR was a badly injured animal, they would shoot it and put it out of its misery. It's just for me that FIFA can't be seen to do that and admit what a mess it's been. And they want someone else to effectively pull the trigger. Arguably, it is the ECJ, but that could be some way off yet, many months, if not years. And I read something this week regarding ECJ decisions, and it's something like an average of 18 months. So we could well face 18 months of further confusion, matters of England being separate with regulations on working with intermediaries, Germany being separate with this strange categorization of a link to Germany. You've already got France and Italy, which are part of national legislation. And who knows who else is going to find their element of the agents industry carved out. And this is an international business.
It is. It is an international business.
We've got very choppy waters ahead.
Yeah, I mean, right now, we should have been in a position where the regulations were sorted out one way or the other, and all these agents who invested time have got current businesses or want to move in the space. Already we know 4,500 registered or passed the exam or a legacy and are ready to go, but we wanted certainty and we want people to move on. But now we're in a very opaque scenario because of all these factors. As you mentioned, the European Court of Justice, what's happening in England, France and Italy, the frameworks aren't super clear at the moment. They've got the national laws, but also a lot of Italian and French agents did the exam because they want to operate internationally. Then we've got a situation where there's also another 150 or so countries or 200 countries of agents, and no one talks about them and what's the experience there. We're always looking at the European experience, but there's things happening in Japan, happening in Australia, in Southeast Asia, in a lot of places. And we also had someone today from the US, which is growing as a market and is probably the home of agency, of player agency. We know that from NFL, NBA and all that, but there's a lot of agents who want to get into football and what's happening over there. It's interesting times ahead. And for our listeners, we want to focus on informing them, providing them updates. Also, I think going forward, we're also going to look at some of the agent business and looking at some of the clauses we use and negotiation. So there's a lot to go in further podcasts. It's an exciting road ahead. However, with the situation in the FIFA Football Agent Regulations and what's happened in England, we still unfortunately have to go back to it because the certainty is not there, Jonathan.
Yeah, we want to bring a wider variety of content to you on the podcast, but It's just that matters dictate at the moment. The last couple of weeks have been pretty manic. We've changed schedules God knows how many times. We've got some really interesting guests lined up and coming on. Unfortunately, we've had to put those interviews back because this is important for everybody. Whether you're a new agent, an old agent, somebody involved in the industry that is affected by agents' activity, whether a player, family member of a player, a coach, a manager, or somebody who works at a club or a league or an association. We want to bring more content to you. It's just very, very difficult to get away from this topic at the moment, as it is so important.
Yes, and on that note, we'll close. Good luck with everyone from the 1st of October. Those who start their licenses, I'm sure it's going to be a very interesting journey ahead, how the business may change. But from us, farewell from me.
Bye, folks. We'll see you on the next episode. Take care of yourselves. Bye.
The purpose of the Agent's Angle podcast is to provide news, information and facilitate discussion on regulatory matters, policies, business trends and issues affecting football agents worldwide. The opinions and recommendations presented in this podcast are for general information only and should never be considered legal or professional advice. Furthermore, the views expressed by guests are their own and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. Thank you for listening.